Hey, welcome to Boundary Break, a show where we basically take the camera anywhere we want to try to find secrets and new discoveries to some of our favorite games. So I did some out of bounds content for Wii Sports about 5 years ago. I've gotten a lot better at trying to figure out what to look for as well as how to present it. So I think you're going to really enjoy this episode whether you're new or old, but there's only one way to find out, right? Let's take a second look at Wii Sports. I'm going to break this off into categories. Each category is going to be just a different sport, and I have one little thing that doesn't really go with any category, and that is the menus. The menus do use three-dimensional graphics, and so if we remove some of the HUD buttons and then move the camera around, you can see that the planet is fully modeled and that these lines that seem to move behind that make up an entire circle if you pan the camera out far enough. Also, that blue haze is just a 16 by 9 square, and it's also completely flat. Let's start out with what I assume is probably the most played sport on Wii Sports, bowling. To start with, let's pan the camera out when it shows you your character before you actually start bowling, and you'll see that there's a lot of me's that get called out. Complete bodies disappear at points, and in some instances, the body parts just start to disappear. But there's a lot of elements in the background that I would love to talk about here. First of all, there's a vending machine. When you take the camera up close, you can just see that it's only blue and brown rectangles with no other defining features to speak of, as well as a pink trash bin. Taking the camera over to the backside will show you that it's not rendered on all sides. In fact, Wii Sports does a ton to save on resources. Like for example, these bowling balls in the background aren't even fully modeled. They take an amazing minimalist approach, something that you normally see for cityscapes far off in the background of other games. And also, as far as I know, there's a desk here that resembles what you would normally go to get your bowling shoes and whatever, completely out of bounds. And I believe it's completely unseen by the player. Also, you can see the ceiling in the original footage, but taking the camera past there will show you that the ceiling gets cut off at a certain point once developers know that the player won't be able to look up. However, there is a reflection for the ceiling in the wood grain, and Wii Sports uses an older technique where everything is just doubled up on the top and bottom. And so you can see what the rest of the ceiling would look like if it were modeled, which has a different pattern from the ceiling that you see with your Mii. Also, because of the culling, you can see how the gutter operates. I know that someone would ask, what does it look like when the bowling balls come back out? And you can see that their coordinates are basically just placed from where it was in the gutter to inside this machine where it gets spit back out. Now for this practice area, there's a couple more things to look at. One, there's a reflection for the bowling balls that are stored in the background, and these ones lack textures. So while they do have the colors, they don't seem to have those interesting designs. And also, since the cameras and the room is designed differently, you can see what the ceiling should actually look like when the ball is going down the lane. And unique to this area alone, there are two red dots at the very end of this room, and taking the camera over there will show you that it's fully modeled red orbs. Anyways, let's give you a zoom out of the entire bowling alley. Hey guys, we're going to be talking about the Gmg Performance Glasses again. And why are we talking about Gmg Performance Glasses? Well, it's because it's actually my favorite product I've talked about on the show so far. And let me tell you why. You know, usually in this day and age, a lot more of us are playing video games or talking to each other on the computer, which exposes us to way more blue light than someone about 20 years ago. And so with these glasses, they'll filter out that light and will help improve your life from the things that blue light tends to degrade. And there's a couple of good reasons why you'd want to wear a pair of glasses like this. One of which being that it helps you with sleep, which is a problem that I tend to have. Two, that it also helps reduce eye strain, which is why I'm going to be wearing these a lot more often, because as you can already see here, by being in front of a computer screen all the time, it makes my eyes look a little bit watery, like I'm about to cry or something. And that's no good. You know, you want to look like a normal human being like the rest of society. So I'm probably going to wear these a lot more often. And again, thank you to Gmg for sponsoring the video. Right now they have a special Black Friday deal where you can save up to 50% until November 29th. That is until the stroke of midnight. So if you're interested, definitely click the link down below so you can take advantage of this 50% off sale. That is a huge discount. And thank me later, because I've definitely used these before and it has definitely helped. So thanks again, guys, and back with the show. All right, now let's take a look at boxing. And first I want to talk about Matt's gym. If you go to the training, you get this special area that is not used in the regular game of boxing. And like I stated earlier, it's the gym that belongs to Matt. But there's a lot to look at here. First of all, if we zoom the camera completely out, you can see that there's a whole outdoor area that the player never gets to see, complete with outdoor fencing, trees, grass, and a sky dome. It's really impressive stuff for a throwaway area. But inside the gym, there's a lot to look at here. And keep in mind that on a normal console, this would be at best 480i with a panned out camera, so this is all tough to look at. Now that we can take a closer look, we can see that there's all sorts of newspaper clippings for Matt. It's clearly Matt's glory days here, as he has hair in these pictures where he doesn't have that now. And they say various things like KO, Legend, and Go Champ. Also, here's a nicer look at all the trophies that he's earned over the years. And even better than all that, there is a room tucked in the back here, but also a scale, and on the inside of the scale, it says Nintendo. Anyways, moving on from there, let's talk about the main event, the actual boxing matches. And this is something that some of you may not have realized, and others eager to let me know that of course they knew about this. But if you're not paying attention, you may not realize that when you start boxing, your audience is almost non-existent. And I say that's a little hard to recognize because to start with, you have a lot of people in the front rows, which is where your focus will mostly be. But as you go further back in the rows, there's less people. In fact, the balcony seats have absolutely nobody on them. Now, if you get to the pro level, those seats completely fill up with Miis. And to save on resources, the Miis in the front have more detailed bodies, but still are not modeled on all sides. And then a few rows back there are Miis without hands, but they all get unique textures on the back of their heads, just in case the camera pans over that way. And then further back than that are Miis that have absolutely no 3D geometry to them whatsoever, and their faces do not get special textures on the back. So if you take the camera behind there, it just looks like a group of Miis staring at you instead of the boxing match. And then you might remember earlier those seats that were completely filled with nobody. Well, now they're filled with cuboids that have a texture over them. And in fact, the weirdest thing about Wii Sports is that there is not a uniform texture for audiences like this. And I'm going to point out all the different types as we go along through this episode. Anyways, here's a zoom out of the boxing ring area. All right, now moving on to baseball, and the first thing I want to talk about is how there's a versus screen here. And there's two things to talk about with this. One is that the versus is a 3D model, and that 3D model is also not modeled on all sides. In fact, any bit of font in this game that uses any sort of type of 3D, if it doesn't spin around or show you the back specifically, then there is no rendering of a backside for it. Again, that's the level of care the developers had to save as much resources as possible. But also with this versus screen, there is a relic here that you can see just barely. I'm going to slow everything down so you can see it as good as possible. But what you're seeing here is that the two different camera perspectives that were shown for my character and the opponent were originally supposed to shift up and down, only to reveal the next screen behind it. But it seems as though the director took a different approach, and in the final product had a whiteout fade that shows you the main camera. Also, this is pretty awesome. Before the game starts, all the players are stored in this one spot, and you can see all sorts of catcher's mitts as well as umpire gear that represent where they're supposed to be. Well, I did find a culling removal code that works for everywhere except for bowling, which is such a travesty because it seems like there's a lot more to be seen in the bowling area. But for baseball, we can now see what it would look like if all the Miis were stacked on top of each other and not turned invisible, basically. And now let's check out the baseball field itself. Taking the camera inside of the announcer box will show you that there's a texture of a reflection of the field inside the box. Now, if this was done proper, it would be on the windows and not concave, because this is supposed to be a reflection, not an interior, which again shows a change in creative direction. It's very likely that there was originally a texture here to represent an announcer's box, but this must have been changed later in production. Also, the audience this time around looked like a bunch of sparkles as opposed to the buttons that you saw in the boxing ring. Also, here's a close-up of various signs that were used in this arena that you don't normally have the time to check out, nor did you have the clarity. But speaking of various signs, and like I said, there's quite a few of these here, we gotta move on and show you a couple of things that are cool about the gear that is used in baseball. Although there isn't any special messages really, there are various objects that have things written on them. Like the baseball itself says baseball, the bat says baseball. This one's really tough to see, but the umpire's gear says baseball on it as well. And normally all the mitts have stars on them, but I did find one mitt with a unique texture, and that was the catcher. not the pitcher surprisingly, who's the only character I can find that has a mitt that says baseball on it. One other little neat thing that I found here is that although the sun is used in baseball, for the opening scene, when you're doing the tutorial, the developers hide the sun by making it backwards. Because it's not modeled on all sides, they were able to hide it from the player by just turning it around. But of course, using the camera here can show you where it truly is. And anyways, let's do a zoom out of the baseball field. And you're going to find that there's buildings here that are used in later parts of the game, which is really neat, and we'll talk about those in the other segment. But I also just want to mention the fact that the sky dome is shaped like a gumdrop, and the void is bright green. And the reason why they would do this, a large majority of this area is a type of green. If there's any tears in the environment, it would only show green instead of black. And now let's talk about tennis. Tennis is really cool because the environment outside of it is probably the most interesting out of any of the other sports. There are buildings that are similar to the baseball area, but there's a lot more detail to them. On the side that you start on, there's an L-shaped building that's green. I don't know if that's a reference to anything. And there's also a hexagonal building as well. And all the windows seem to have a picture of what looks like a park or possibly a golf course. It's hard to tell, but it's clearly a real-life picture. But the 2 times I was able to find them were here in this map. Like, for example, going to the Sky Dome will show you some sort of city on the water. I haven't been able to match up the picture perfectly to an existing area, but if anybody ever does find that picture, let me know on Twitter. Anyways, on the opposite side, there's an oval building, and there's an area where the athletes would go in and out of. Taking the camera over there will show you that there isn't really a door, but it is modeled there. And that same green texture is just stretched out over the door. And now this time the faraway audience looks like a stained glass window, which again is unique to itself, unlike all the other sports. Anyways, now moving on to the training area, I can show you the entire wall in its entirety for one of these mini games that you can play. And I can also show you the entire area in one shot. This one features only trees and absolutely no buildings. And then before you start the game, you can see your Miis against a mystery Mii. And you'll see that these mystery Miis are fully modeled. They just lack any noses or any other features on their face. And at this angle, you can see where the Miis are in relation to the tennis court itself. Well, it's kind of funny, I didn't mean to save the best for last, but golf really does have one of the most interesting things to talk about in this episode, and that is that golf has a hidden castle in it. Out of the 9 holes, 5 has a castle off in the distance. It's not easy to see while you're playing the game, but there are hints of it in the distance. And taking the camera up to it can show you that there's a lot of details to it. Some of the things that you'll immediately see is that there are a couple of spires, as well as a center point that has a gate, and it all rests on top of a platform. And taking the camera underneath the ground can show you that that platform goes some ways down that you don't see above the ground level. But because this castle is so unique, I decided to rip the texture of it and just see if there's anything else that this thing can tell us. And I'm discovering here that, yeah, there is something in this texture sheet that's not even shown on the castle itself, which wouldn't be easy to be seen by the player anyways. These 2 blue parts here look like they either represent one of 2 things, and that is either a set of windows that are not seen by the player, or a flag that was meant to be set atop the spires. Either way, it was never used at all, and I tried to look through the entire model inside and out just to see if there was any hint of the blue part of the texture sheet. So an already obscure object in the game has some unused elements to it as well, which is really interesting. Inside the holes is a unique texture sheet that isn't easily seen by the player, and so I'm giving you a good look at it right now, but also taking the camera underneath the ground can show you that the hole itself is a lot deeper than where the texture would imply, and that texture is a complete square that just kind of clips outside the circular model. And then any course where there's calm water has a reflection in the water itself. And the way that that's once again pulled off is by doubling up on all the environment on the opposite side of what's going on in the real world. And panning the camera out here can show you a really cool looking sky dome, one that's sort of in the shape of a football. This is only achieved because of the fact that there's supposed to be a reflective surface awarded to the player. So this sky dome in itself is pretty rare. And honestly, going through all 9 courses, like for example, this one is course 6, shows that the developers put a lot of effort into these environments. This one in particular has a river that's not really shown anywhere else in the game, not even other courses. And it's really interesting to pan the camera out and just show you how the river goes into the ocean. You can see the separation between the river and the ocean itself. You can also see how the mountains are just a wraparound texture, but it all comes together to make a really beautiful environment, one that it's just surprising that the developers put so much effort into, seeing as they could just take prefetched assets and modulate it to their heart's content. You're seeing a lot of unique modeling here. And lastly, I'm going to do a tour around the tennis court just to say thank you so much for watching. It's been 5 long years since the original episode, and it's just insane to think about. So just a big thank you for anybody that's stuck around with the show for that long. And if you're new here, I hope you choose to stick around yourself. If not, either way, thank you so much for watching. Appreciate it. Take it easy.